Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Welcome to another episode with Noor Riyadh podcast. We're here in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. Mohammed Islam from the Mo Show podcast. We have Jumana Ghoth, who's my co-host, and we have the artist, Mehend Shonno. Thank you guys so much for joining us today.
Very excited.
So I think the first thing I'm going to ask you is, how are you doing with us being so close to the opening and, our nerves are all over the place and challenges are rising, obstacles are coming up normally. How do you feel?
I feel good. I'm not nervous at all.
I'm not nervous at all.
I'm not nervous. I think, I feel like I've been here before.
Yeah.
And kind of actually doing smaller work, like ink on paper work, has become more nerve-wracking than doing these bigger projects. I don't know why. Can't explain it.
Is it because of the labor?
I think you're more faced with your ideas when you're alone and doing something intimate versus when you can kind of mask things around a big production, a lot of faces, people contributing. It is reassuring actually to work with people. I think we tend to also avoid being left alone with our thoughts because it's you really need to confront who you are as a human being when you do that. And maybe that's what I'm doing. I've been avoiding what I really want to work on a smaller scale. Maybe that's why I'm feeling very confident.
That's amazing, actually. That's a good point. You mentioned something that I really want to talk about, and I think you started as an artist who mostly worked on, I'm going to say mostly.
Comics.
But yeah, so you worked with, would you say a comic style? I mean,
I was hugely influenced by comics.
Who's your favorite one?
The biggest influence on me was Todd McFarlane's Spawn.
Spawn, I remember Spawn.
We had this conversation.
He used to do Spider-Man, the Amazing
Spider-Man. Yeah.
And he really revolutionized that kind of dynamic movement. It was, I remember a friend smuggled a series of The Amazing Spider-Man versus the Lizard. And I was hyperventilating as I was going through these comics. And back then, of course, it was very difficult to get a comic. Things were censored. It was a kind of limited selection of things, and we had to deal with pages missing or just ink on.
How long ago was this?
Do we need to get into this?
I'm not going to ask you about your age. I just asked how long ago.
Why you gotta do it like this? It was long enough. It was the 80s, the 90s. It was, you were scrounging for culture, for pop culture, for information.
Can we just stay on comic books for a second?
Yeah.
There's something that I want to I'm shocked by a fact that I just found out.
Yeah.
I always knew the comic books, they go for a pretty penny. If I was to guess what was the most expensive comic book ever, I would have booked just like a magazine. I would have put it at $700,000 or $800,000, just to really go off the scales, the most expensive one ever. I was really, really off. What do you think the most expensive comic book is ever sold?
3 point something million.
3 point?
Something million.
What's that something?
Which currency?
Dollars, US.
Dollars.
Yeah. What?
Dollars.
Yeah, what? 3 point?
I do have to be very specific.
Yeah, because you're really close.
3.8?
3.
Did you get it?
3.6.
Okay. No.
How'd you know that?
No, I totally guessed it. I don't know.
Can you believe 3.6 for a comic book?
That's a lot. Do you remember what it was?
No, I'm looking at it right here.
It could be the first
Superman
appearance.
Superman?
Auction is the debut Spider-Man, the web series, the
Edged
teenage
Mouse.
hero. Edged out Superman.
Because Spider-Man is more popular now.
Yeah.
The movies.
Yeah. Did you know that they all started as comic books?
Yeah, I did, of course.
That's something that I only recently knew. I didn't know that Spider-Man and I think Superman and Batman, they were all comic books.
Yeah, of course.
Before cartoons.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So you started with that style. There's one thing I really recognize in your work. I mean, when you started off, you're saying you were inspired by, let's say, Spider-Man. And you never used to work with color.
No, I mean...
you still don't.
I used to when I was a kid, when I used to do comics.
Yeah.
But I think this drift towards the monochromatic black and white.
Yeah.
So I think my relationship with the monochromatic, the black, came as part of this kind of revisiting of my relationship with comics when I was younger. And remembering how the image, the word would be redacted, censored. And kind of realizing that that obsession with this new kind of collaboration between the original comic book creator and the censorship person who was adding to this book. I was consuming something. I don't know where the black should have been or shouldn't have been. Maybe it was the intent of the original comic book creator. So it was an interesting hybrid that I was experiencing. A thing that wanted to express, but at the same time was being restricted. And realizing that that black was actually a highlight. It wasn't a limiting my ability to imagine. It actually was calling to me to imagine multiple scenarios that were now missing. So it actually strengthened and resulted in a more dynamic and fluid way of thinking about what could be removed actually is potentially everything. I mean, you were actually one of the first people who kind of helped me transition from the comic book space into an opportunity to exhibit at Athar, my first solo, because you looked at my work and, we managed to get that mural going in the staircase. And I realized doing the mural that I existed in transitional spaces always. And I was hoping for the VIPs to like flow from gallery 1 to gallery 2. And I think there was an Ayman Yusri Doban retrospective happening in the top floor.
Funny enough, it was called Give Me the Light.
Give Me the Light. Wow, interesting.
Oh,
yeah.
So I see what you did there.
I was hoping like all these curators, the people I work with now and visit and want to listen about my work, were just transitioning through the staircase. They were not interested in the unexpected in this moment of transition. And I thought it really was time for me to choose a category and to transition from the staircase, transitional space, into the gallery space.
But would you say that it was out of your comfort zone in a way?
No, it was my comfort zone. It was
your comfort
existing zone. In this in between, borders between this and that. When I used to do comics, I would take them to comic book shops and they would say, it's not really a comic book, it's an art book.
Yeah.
And I would take the comic or the art book to the gallery space,
and they would say it's a comic
and they'd be like, it's a comic book.
Yeah.
So where do I belong? I go to a bookshop. Where would I want to put this thing? Nowhere.
Yeah.
It doesn't fit anywhere.
Yeah.
So this personal lack of categorization about identity and about my work were a big part of this confusion early on growing up.
But it's still a big part of your practice now, right?
Yeah.
You haven't completely
But I've come
shut
to
that
grips
door.
with it.
Yeah.
I'm wielding it now with more intent rather than it pushing me in ways I didn't understand.
Yeah. And now I think you react more. I mean, you were very limited as to your, you had whether it was a piece of paper or a certain canvas, or you were always very limited with size, I guess, in the beginning. But now suddenly you're taking over buildings and large spaces and instead adapting to that space. So I really want to talk about the work that you're obviously doing for Noor Riyadh. I think they would love to hear more about it from you. But I think let's talk about the building a little bit. Why did you select that particular building?
I think the building was kind of spoke to us.
Yeah.
And we didn't have, let's say, a limited selection.
Yeah.
But I did want something that was very much embedded within the urban fabric of the city. And, also this desire to move out of the white gallery space. Because it is, in the beginning, I thought it was very forgiving and limitless, but it was actually exists within a specific bubble. And people are experiencing the work with certain expectations that I'm stepping into a gallery or an exhibition space or an installation. And thus your mind is prompted or prepped in a way that is unproductive in stimulating and disrupting the lived world.
It's almost like guidelines, huh?
Yeah, like you know what you're stepping into. It's no longer surprising. Now you're behaving differently. You need to look like you're intelligent. You want to read this stuff, but you don't want to read the concept. And it's just a very awkward experience to experience work in a gallery. But if you stumble on something in the middle of an alleyway, much like a superhero who's like waiting dormant to take you on an adventure, waiting for you. that disrupts your everyday life and allows you to activate the imagination, which is what I want.
Let's talk a little bit about the work itself. First of all, let's mention the title.
Title is I See You Brightest in the Dark.
And
Love it.
it's a very, you're definitely going, you're taking people through the process.
Yeah.
I mean, it's very transitional.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk about that. And what made you, was it the space that dictated the concept to you in a way? Not dictate, I mean, maybe that's a strong word to use, but
Facilitated.
The work? Or was it just an idea that you always wanted to execute and that space happened to be?
It's like linking literally threads of ideas and intentions and what the spaces looks like and making sense of it. But it does come from a very personal experience of someone who was very close to me, who I knew was sick, and I was living in Sydney at the time. And I had this kind of visitation by this person at 3 a.m., middle of the dark, middle of the night. I wake up and there's this light and I can see this person's face. And I find myself sitting up in my bed, kind of calling their name and reaching out into the darkness towards this light. And then snapping out of it and just dumbfounded by what just occurred and just going back to sleep. And then waking up at 7 a.m. to go to work and realizing that I got a message from my father. That person did pass away that time.
Oh, wow.
So it's about, the work is about what is your personal relationship with the intangible? What was something that was once something you could hold physically that was now translucent, elusive, and ethereal like light? So it's taking you through this dutiful, loving attempt to weave back something that is now intangible into tangibility. And this toil and work it takes, though it is futile and does not result in accessing the other place, but there's an attempt and taking people through this journey through different stages of this relationship with the intangible.
So maybe just we
describe it
a little bit, but in your own, I mean, the process. I think people are more interested in, you have a very specific process, and taking over such a large space in such a short period of time can be very taxing, but it's almost there, it's coming together, and it's coming together beautifully. And it's definitely a challenge. And I think a lot of the young sort of emerging artists did actually ask me this question before about you, and hence why we put your name forward for the apprenticeship, because a lot of people, I think, want to go through, they're very fascinated by the way that you create your process. So, and you're very articulate in the way that you describe it. So let's just go through that a little bit and explain the work as you would, as if you're visiting.
Yeah.
In the process or in the transition that you would want people to go through.
I mean, before I describe the work, I just want to tell you why this kind of work is easy. Because the childhood me, who was drawing characters when he was younger, would be told by teachers here to strike a line through the neck of your characters, because only God could create.
That's something I mentioned in the first intro, remember, but I don't
know. Now, as a child who was very reliant on that world for safety, for deciphering the lived world, for also as a refuge, this was a violent assault on this living world. And that kid chose to say no and continue to take the line, not to strike lines through necks and limit the imagined world, but instead to allow the line to duplicate and multiply and take form and shape and move and tell stories. The work in Al-Milaz, in Beit Al-Milaz, is a single line of thread, but we're wielding it in number, in repetition, with intention, and thus it becomes this act of taking a singular thing that can, if used incorrectly, can bring things to a halt and is insignificant in its outcomes. Very significant, but a single thing can really derail a journey. So wielding that line, having faith in its repetition and its use and its manifestation is very important in the way I work. And it's labor intensive, but it is flow state, it is meditative, and it allows you to take that line and allow it to create.
Yeah, that's an amazing example of taking something that would be considered negative into something that, you know, you've
and it's an obsession.
Turned into
It's an obsession. It's you're constantly, every time you're doing work, you're saying yes, not no. Yeah. You're saying yes, yes, yes.
Are you proud of how far we've come in that sense? Like, I don't think they have those same limitations in art courses or in art classes anymore in school. I remember going through that myself.
Yeah.
But I don't think that kids are going through it now. I mean, you have a 5-year-old. Do you see that in his art books?
I mean, I see him coming home with various pieces of art.
Yeah.
But I think at that age, it was probably similar to my years in KG over here.
Yeah.
But where I really think barriers have been broken is further up the ladder, where you have a little bit more freedom. And there aren't as many barriers as they were when I left 6th grade here in 95, 96.
Yeah.
It's more freedom.
I would assume, now there is more freedom. I mean, don't you think that we especially with the entire art movement and everything 100%. That we're doing and all the support that we're receiving from all these government entities.
Mandated, I think, through Ministry of Education.
Now we have backup and...
Or else you wouldn't have something that's on the scale of Noor Riyadh, be airborne right now if it wasn't really from the ground up. Because
I've worked with, several of the Saudi artists in this edition of Noor Riyadh. When we were going through the curatorial process, honestly, there were very little limitations. I mean, unless something is directly disrespectful to somebody or an entity or a body of some sort, which rarely happened, to be honest. I didn't see any.
I don't experience any of that kind of. But I think my generation of artists, we do impose self-censorship.
Yeah.
Because we're still also trying to figure out where that barrier is.
Yeah.
And so far, I haven't experienced it.
Yeah. But I also think it's almost it's like an unspoken rule. Like, we all know where our limits are, as as Saudis, as citizens. I think we all know what the red lines are, and it's very clear. Even though it wasn't the case years ago, but somehow we know how we can feel how free things have, how limitless. Well, not completely limitless, but I mean, it's nice to have some borders to work through. But I think we've definitely come a long way. It's definitely not what we.
I mean, limitations are extremely valuable.
I agree.
You know what I mean? Like, nothing is worse than having a limitless.
I agree.
Yeah.
Thing. You need to say, I'm not gonna do this.
Yeah.
I'm gonna quit my job.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna allow someone to say yes or no.
Yeah. I'm
gonna make my own decisions. So you give your reasons and your whys to yourself, and then you work within that. And the work in Venice was a manifestation of this creative resistance. This my who I am today in my existence and my energy and my work is a result of the restrictions, made more stronger, made more focused because of them.
But don't you think that's what the Saudi art scene is?
Yes.
It stemmed from these limitations, and I think that's why these limitations are incredibly valuable.
And that's where we're incredibly abstract, very conceptual.
Yes, absolutely.
We had to avoid the figurative.
Absolutely.
And I'm curious to see what the next generation is going to able to. I want this very robust and culturally strong form of expression that, the opening up of limitations and all the support doesn't weaken, the output, let's say, or the concepts or the ability to work and make.
Yeah, I think that's why limitations, as you said, are incredibly important, because they challenge.
And if there are no limitations, you must impose them, like self-impose them on yourself.
Yeah,
which is tricky in its own, I think.
Tricky. It's
setting your own
hurdles.
Yeah,
it's important.
It's almost like you prefer someone to set them for you.
Yeah.
This way I don't want one less thing to think about.
It's easier to follow when someone else.
Yeah, the cones are here. This is where you play.
Yeah, exactly.
But seek challenges. Like if things are going smoothly, you know, it's a cliche, but really get out of your comfort zone, because then you'll learn something about yourself.
100%.
When you were accepted at Venice, were you nervous at all?
No. I thought it was. I found it boring, and it was like I used to do Comic-Cons. So Venice was like a Comic-Con, but it was a bigger room, more budget, more wealthy people coming in and out. But everybody had a table. Everybody was showing their work, and somebody got more attention, somebody got less attention. But I realized that Venice was very political as well, and we have a long way to go as a Saudi art scene to earn credit, because we're easily dismissed before we're even engaged with.
True.
What would you do to change that, though?
Just, in the end, your work, your toil, your character wins the day.
Numbers as well, strengthen numbers. Artists, getting artists out there.
More artists, more kind of not resting. Like support and funding is valuable. It is as you say in Arabic, a tharwa, that you need to invest in yourself and your community. But it alone cannot create resilience or strength of ideas and output. So
any raised eyebrows in Venice that you're from Saudi Arabia, interesting, let's see what you have.
Absolutely. And I think we're also struggling with market value as an artist, because you're dismissed. If you want to collect Saudi art, maybe a lot of collectors in the West are more interested in things that are more fetishized, cliches, things they can say, this is clearly from Saudi. So when you produce work that is unrecognizable, has no identity or nationality, it's just a form of expression. But that's not interesting. How are you going to tell your rich friends that I bought this work that looks like it could be from anywhere in the world? It's not interesting enough. And the question is, why are we seeking that kind of validation and acquisition versus maybe self-generating an acquisition market and a value that is here that is sought after, rather than us seeking to be collected overseas?
Do you think an event of the size of Noor Riyadh has the art world raising their eyebrows, saying, oh, look what Saudi are doing now? They're not only creating artists, but they're putting together a huge scale light art show. Is that something that's creating waves internationally?
I think it's chipping away at stereotypes, editorial headlines about who we are, which we need to reclaim, telling our own stories. I think it's definitely doing things. It's allowing people to come and meet and talk, which is so valuable, I think, like this discussion here.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was telling Mo how, artists all over the world, even in an international level and a global level, really struggle with getting their work to be in a public realm. So the fact that, we have a government that is, that develop an establishment that actually, is securing very, very large, very generous budgets for this festival in order to create, an X number of public sculptures around Riyadh is amazing.
It's a privilege. It's a privilege. Never did we dream that we'd be in this situation.
Yeah.
And
it's crazy.
But also seeing myself wanting to be here, to establish a studio, and bring people back, and seeing people moving here and deciding to make Saudi a creative home for them is very exciting.
Yeah.
You guys talk about the art scene, that it's all coming back here. Look what's happening, Vision 20 Arts. Tomorrow, by coincidence, I'm going to Saudi Arabia's first podcasting exhibition. There is a podcasting exhibition. Not to switch, but under the umbrella of Vision 2030, they were mandated to do something for the podcasting industry.
That's amazing.
Which is something just it's new in compared to all other mediums.
I love that.
2,000 people expected at CAFT, one of the the more glitzy areas of town. A lot of the podcasters from the region, some of the biggest names they're coming through. People who want to invest in the space, enter the space. A Minister of Tourism is coming through, and some other. So they're doing something for that, and that's just one of many things that are happening in the space for artists and content creators alike.
And creatives, yeah.
Absolutely. Creatives, yeah.
But even like going to a cafe and seeing young boys and girls on their laptops, reading books, coming up with like talking about new projects or businesses they want to start, and just like that's something me growing up I never saw.
Didn't exist 5 years ago. I wouldn't even go back to as recent as when you were young.
Yeah.
I would go back as recent as 5 years.
I think everybody changed privately in their bedrooms. And then once the walls around the bedroom opened up and the mind was allowed
you too. Yeah.
So this kind of collective rising is important.
You said something about wanting to get into artist residencies or something like that. Is that?
I've opened a studio residence. So having
in
art
your house,
in a new home.
Are you financing this yourself?
So some of the artists are there full time as tenants, and we have spare rooms. So if there's a project and we, instead of budgeting accommodation for them to be in a hotel, they can. It just covers the.
It pays itself.
It pays for itself basically.
Okay.
But it's so essential to have this kind of accessibility and sense of community. For cross collaboration, for exchange of skills and ideas is very essential.
Yeah.
Because we need to accelerate our investment in the person. Because the creative scene is small and limited. It's we're stretched thin. There's not a lot of us who have been doing this when it was not encouraged to be creative or make film or be a musician. There are no spaces to exhibit. We never used to meet each other.
It's unstoried. We're just writing the story right now. There's no history.
Yeah.
At least not in the last 30.
I love that car honking in the background.
I have two questions, and I'm super cold eye perspective because I'm learning a lot about the art world. I'm not from the art world. I don't know what world I'm from.
You're from the podcasting world.
Podcasting. Favorite art piece and biggest challenge you've ever faced, let's say, in creating an art piece.
Every project has its challenges, and the reality is that I like to really plan projects but not know the outcome. So I like a method of working but no blueprint. Even if they're big and architectural or structural, or we have a method of working, but really that final outcome, like Desert X, The Lost Path, we discovered this very quiet cove where there's no reception on your phone and you can't hear a single thing. And we wanted that to be the ending of the path, of the structure. And some chose to follow this path to the end and some didn't.
There's a lot of, I guess there's a
sculptural sketch, it was.
Yeah, but I mean, I guess you didn't move very far from what your inspiration was as a kid, being Spider-Man. Spider-Man's weapon is like threads. And it still exists. Everything
Good
that
one.
you do has threads.
You just lowered my value.
No. I think it's beautiful.
My sellability just
No,
went down.
absolutely not. I mean, it looks very different. It feels very different. But your initial, I guess it's
true.
somehow,
Yeah.
in your subconscious mind. Threads and lines are forever probably integrated.
And
into your
the black
practice.
void,
And the black void.
It's like a well of limitless ink.
Yeah.
It's either it obscures, or from it you can read and create and draw and write and just infinite.
But I think that's so important, although because you did move away from your initial style of working or practicing art, which was very, comic inspired, slightly illustrative. And then you moved into incredibly conceptual and immersive and interactive in a way.
Funny story. I felt guilty about being an illustrator and drawing characters twice in my life. When I was younger, and I was told not to draw characters, and there was a guilt, like I'm going to go to hell. And the second time was when I switched into the contemporary art scene, because the very illustrative and the character was also considered not desirable. You need to be more abstract. You needed to be more conceptual. So I felt that twice.
Yeah. And I think you felt the pressure as well.
There was a pressure to
wanting
abstract,
to adapt
yeah,
to what was happening in the art scene.
And I blame you. So.
Okay. Yeah, that's fine. Hey man, look where you are now. So I'm okay. I'm
Who's
okay with that.
now? Yeah,
I'm okay with that. I'll take the blame. But it's still what inspired you when you were a child is still there.
Yeah.
And you can still see it. And I think that's so important. And that makes, I mean, you can definitely now see a piece. And I think that's what's important. Although you moved away from your illustrative work, your identity is very, very clear. I mean, I can see a work somewhere in the middle of nowhere and say, that's Mehend Shonno. I can tell. And that's when you know.
Amazing.
Your identity is incredibly clear. And that's what you should be proud of. So no matter how much you drive away from the initial work that you started off with, it's still you. You haven't lost your identity.
Yep.
And that's very evident in everything that you do.
Is that something you're conscious of trying to maintain your identity?
No, I think we all exist within cycles of repeated behavior that we can't really break. Some are really have a very long arc, so it's hard to recognize. Some are like mistakes and things you do over and over again. But we all have our same patterns, we have our own. And it's about becoming comfortable in your own skin and accepting your background and accepting your name and accepting your circumstance, your obsessions, you know, the things that made you insecure that you're trying to feed, that you're trying to silence, or the things that kind of sparked your mind and you don't want that spark to end. Those things are the basic cycles of life that we're, you know, both trapped in and free to express within.
What makes you insecure?
I think this identity issue, categorization.
Why the identity issue? A lot of people don't know your background. Why identity issue?
Because I grew up as a, you know, like say, son of migrants to Saudi. So we're, you know, we're not, as you call it, we're naturalized, Mujannisin. So this was a big question growing up, especially in Riyadh. Like, you know, where are you from originally? Where's your father from? Your name is in Saudi. So all these kinds of like, maybe early on feeling like you didn't belong. So then you retreat to borders. You no longer want to engage with this landscape or that landscape. You're just kind of observing and navigating lines between spaces and things.
Deep.
Let's go deeper. Let's make him uncomfortable. No, I'm joking.
Ask about my age.
How old are you? No, it's not the same for a guy. It's like your own.
I have one. You said let's go deeper. Any fears? Is there something a line you won't cross, a piece you won't do, something that scares you in this field?
No, not yet. And there's always ways to express things, you know. And I think we've become very good at saying things without saying things. And it's kind of enjoyable but am I fearful of saying something that I want to say? No, I don't think so.
And in terms of a piece, commissioning a piece or an art installation, you will really go wherever you want to go, wherever the mind will take you.
Yeah.
Unlimitedly.
I'm sure there are limitations, but they're also part of the cycle. You've already been conditioned to exist within a certain sphere of expression. And this is what I was saying before about like self redaction or self restriction on expression. Maybe we've been trained to be careful, but so far I feel like I'm well outside the boundaries of my comfort zone.
Do you feel alive?
No. I think the joy has been, I think there's a reputation that I'm a bit of a machine in our scene. But it's almost like an addiction, like you're chasing the joy. And it's elusive when you've gone away from your personal relationship with your mind and your comic and your page, and that story, that kind of creation just by yourself, to now managing production of a space and teams and people and deadlines, and that has become an unexpected kind of downfall in the process of creation. And but you're never really satisfied as a human being, and being lost and confused about your work is very essential in order to be able to evolve it to the next stage. Am I finding joy in the work? The surprising answer is no, I'm not. But I understand it's a journey. There is no plot twist if you quit the journey.
Okay.
And I'm waiting for that plot twist to reveal itself.
So you keep chipping away to seek that twist. That's really interesting.
You have faith. You go on a journey, you change your life, you do something crazy, and that's the point. You want to read a good book, you don't want to know the ending of the story. If you knew the ending, I wouldn't do it. Yeah. I would just sit down and just reread that ending over and over again. And
I mean, the famous saying, it's the journey, really, not the destination. And
yeah.
Amazing. Well, thank you, Mehend.
Pleasure.
I cannot wait.
I want to go see it first tomorrow.
Yeah.
Me too. I want to see it first.
We can't wait to see it come to life. I think it's already obviously has come to life. We're about to see it, and we're so excited, and I'm sure everybody's going to be blown away. And
how many stories is the building?
4.
And they just said, do your work?
No, I said. I'll do my work.
I love it. I love it.
Okay, so that's a wrap.
Yeah, that's a wrap. Thank you again, man.
Thank you, guys. Keps is on the way.
See you again. Keps is on the way. Let's not say Keps. Let's say something else, because I feel like it's.
Yeah, it's that other podcast.
Yeah.
No Keps ever.
Thanks for your time, guys. Can't wait to see the art installation tomorrow and the others that you're going to take us to. And we look forward to the main event. Thank you.
Yes.
Thanks, guys.
Over and out.